This Choircast podcast episode is brought to you by The Wisdom of Hobbits, by me, Matthew J. Distefano. In this hopeful yet at times poignant homage, I focus on everyone's favorite halfling friend, the Hobbit. A charming people, this Shire-based race has captivated, enthralled, and enchanted the hearts and minds of millions. And though they're not a religious society, I argue that spiritual truths, love, kindness, generosity, hope, and even compassion can be found within their familiar, yet still relevant and didactic tales. Available now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever you get your fine books. From Choir Publishing.
Liminal. A word 1,000 miles wide but small enough to fit into the present moment. It describes an in-between place. We live most of our lives within this space, not quite ever arriving at our idealistic final destination. We spend so much of our energies on our best impersonation of who we wish we were, until we can't. But in sneaks a dark night of the soul, or perhaps a mystical experience. Our way of being has an error loop introduced. Today we call that deconstruction. Welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast, where we teach you how to be here, how to traverse these spaces, and where we can go if we remain humble, open, and honest. Welcome back to another episode of the Liminal Living Podcast, where we explore the liminal intersections of spirituality, theology, and the actual lives we inhabit. I'm your curator of conversations, Tom Rundell, and today we have curated a really fun guest with Matthew Distefano. He wrote the book, The Wisdom of Hobbits. Yes, we get to nerd out on the Lord of the Rings, Hobbits, Middle-earth, and all the ways that fictional story relates to our world today, from politics to relationships to ecology, everything. Matthew's journey is one that many of us can relate to. He had to navigate the highs and lows of his own faith. He had to seek out authenticity in his relationships and finding solace in the stories that just resonated with his deepest self. One of those was Lord of the Rings. And in his book, Wisdom of Hobbits, Matthew dives into that world of Middle-earth and those beloved hobbits, and he draws out wisdom and inspiration from their simple yet profound lives. And today we're unpacking not just the themes of his book, but also the personal experiences that led him to write that book. So if you've ever felt burned out by the relentless demands of life, if you've ever questioned the superficial connections within your community, or if you just felt the demand and pressure to conform over truly growing spiritually, then you're going to connect with this conversation. These are some of the critical issues that Matthew tackles head on, and his reflections on the challenges he faced within the evangelical church shed light on the delicate balance between individual well-being and community expectations. One of the most compelling aspects of Matthew's story is his shift from traditional theology to exploring themes that personally inspired him. So we'll hear how Tolkien's tale of courage, friendship, and resilience provide not just an escape, but a roadmap for navigating his own hero's journey. And Matthew's insights remind us that true growth often comes from the margins, from those voices that are too often overlooked. So whether you're a fan of Tolkien, someone seeking deeper connection within your faith community, or you're just looking for inspiration to keep moving forward, this episode is for you. Now, a quick reminder, if you'd rather watch this interview, you can head over to our YouTube page where these videos are posted there. So without further ado, let's welcome Matthew Distefano to the podcast today and learn some profound reflections on the timeless wisdom of hobbits. We're rolling. Matthew Distefano, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. It is really cool to see all the Lord of the Rings stuff behind you today. How you doing?
I'm nerding out on Lord of the Rings. I'm ready to roll. How are you?
I'm doing well. I love to nerd out on Lord of the Rings as well. So I think this is going to be a pretty fun conversation. So you wrote this book called The Wisdom of Hobbits. I got to read that book, and I'm a Lord of the Rings nerd. I have the trilogy on my nightstand as like a box set, leather bound. The lighting or the writing is really tiny.
I have many leather-bound books.
You have many leather-bound books. The writing is too small for me because I'm getting older now.
Yeah.
But I was like, I don't care. This is way too cool.
Sorry,
And,
that's to quote Anchorman. Sorry.
see, I missed that one because there's so many pop references from that period of time that I miss because we were raising my son, and I was just like, our hands were full. We weren't watching all that stuff.
Yeah, you're good.
All right. So when was the first time you read Lord of the Rings?
It must have been like, it was after high school. It must have been just after college. I read The Hobbit in 8th grade. It was required reading. And I liked it. My love for Tolkien grew over time. It's not like, I don't have like this like Genesis story of like being gobsmacked by Tolkien. It was more of like a slow burn for me, which is fine. But then I think what I listened to it on audio. I think like my second read through was on audio, or maybe it was my third read through, and that was Inglis was the narrator, and he did such a good job. I mean, it just got me more and more into it. So there was all these like different Tolkien events that happened for me that just I became more and more enamored with it, and then like an onion, peeling back the layers. There's so much lore, and there's so much philosophy, and there's so much theology, and there's just like endless things we can talk about. There's ecology, and there's the hero's journey. There's all these themes that I touch on in the book that you mentioned, that I don't know. My love for Tolkien grows more as the years go by.
I'm with you on that one. I actually watched the movies first. I had no idea
same.
that it existed.
Same. Right.
Yeah,
I mean, I knew there were books, but I read The Hobbit before any of the movies were even created. But then, I believe I read the books before the movies came out. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, I didn't know the books existed. I was in the movies, like the movie theater with my friend James. And we saw the trailer, and he started nerding out because he's a fantasy nerd, and he's like, oh my gosh, Lord of the Rings, this is going to be the greatest thing ever. And I'm like, what's Lord of the Rings? Right. And then, we watched the movies when they came out in the theaters, and then I was like, I got to read these books. And then I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much more in these books. And it's like one of those things I tried to read the trilogy like once a year now, and it's like something pops out every time, something new pops out. It's just it's so deep like that. So
I wish I could read them once a year. I try to do that as well. I mean,
it never plays out.
Ironically, the more I've written about it, the less I just sit down to read for enjoyment. I'm always like referencing it, but and always reading bits and pieces constantly.
Yeah.
But having the time, it's ironic as a publisher and an author. The more I become a publisher, the less I've read just for enjoyment.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So who would be like a favorite character from the series, and why?
For me, I always pick Sam. I'm a gardener. I'm a gardener myself. My best friend Mike and our relationship in some way resembles. There's many parallels to Frodo and Sam. We garden together. I'm the nerd on that. Like I love soil science, and I love learning about plants. I think I agree with Tolkien that Sam is the chief hero of the story, even though he's not necessarily the main protagonist. I think Sam is the glue that holds Frodo together, as well as, I mean, Frodo does as well as he can. I'm not throwing any dirt or mud, slinging any mud his way, but I just think Sam he grows the most. I think he has some of the biggest transformation. I just really gravitate to him.
Yeah, I same with me. He's my favorite character.
Yeah.
Just that part where, he says, I can't carry the ring, but I can carry you, and puts him on his back and does the final leg that Frodo couldn't do.
Sure.
And I start crying every time I read that.
And
part.
book Faramir is great too. I think.
He's amazing. Underrated for sure.
For sure underrated. Like, I think what true masculinity should look like. I think His ability to balance and tension, like a different type of leadership, rather than you get this like Boromir type, which is like very machismo. So Book Faramir would be maybe second, but I mean, I love the complexity of Gollum. I think as an ant, not necessarily a villain. I don't even see Gollum as a villain. I don't see him as an anti-hero. He's just he's unique. But the psychology of Gollum and Smeagol is fascinating, and of course Tom Bombadil, right? Like, we always have to talk about Tom Bombadil as some sort of, I don't, whether favorite or love to hate or whatever your relationship is with Tom Bombadil.
Well, I would say that like my one complaint with the movies is they didn't capture Faramir's personality that is actually in the books.
Right.
They didn't capture his complexity and his leadership and his character. They kind of made him as a conflicted character in the movie that he wasn't quite in the books.
He wasn't like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyone who has not read the books, and you need to go read about the parts with Faramir, because that was pretty complex. Gollum, he was. I don't know how to categorize him in your typical characters. He is just something really unique, because he's the one that actually Sam takes Frodo to the place where it needs to happen, but then Frodo still can't do it. And then it is the kind, selfless actions of Frodo get him to this place, and the selfishness of Gollum. It's like those blend together in that moment at the end where it's like evil crushes itself in that moment. Yeah.
So. It's just a complexity that keeps us talking about it for so long, because it's not, it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Like, a good guy doesn't defeat evil in the end, right? Like, it's more complicated than that. But that's true to life, right? Really. I mean, we're not Manichaean good guys and Manichaean bad guys. It's all more complicated than that.
Yeah, I think Gollum is probably like you and me and all of us.
Well, I think that's the point. Like, it's almost a prophetic warning. Like, I pointed out in the book, like, what happens. I can't remember if it's Wisdom of Hobbits or Mimetic Theory, but I pointed out in one of the two books that I posed the question rhetorically, like, what happens if Sam's not there? What happens if if Gollum's not there? Sam's there with Frodo, and Frodo's at the precipice, and Gollum's not there, and he puts the ring on, disappears, walks past Sam. What becomes of Frodo? Mm-hmm. Like, maybe Frodo's goodness keeps the ring at bay, but at that point, it seemed like he would go in the same direction as Gollum, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the complexity of how power interacts with the human. Mm-hmm. It's such a deep series. Like, you just can't delve the depths of it. You're gonna find something new every time.
Yeah, and that's not even to mention the Silmarillion and all the other writings and the lore and the depth. I mean, forget about it.
I finally did read the Sil. I think it was two or 3 years ago. Yeah, I got through that, and that was like reading the Old Testament in King James. It really is. I was like, man, this is thick. But there's some good stuff there.
There's a lot of names here. Like, how am I supposed to remember all this? And
Yeah, so Tom Bombadil, to be honest, I'm always like, this is the part I got to get through to get on with the rest of the story. I've never been a fan of Tom. What do you like about Tom?
I don't know if I like... Well, I mean, Tom specifically, I'm not sure. There's a lot to like, I guess, in like if you like that kind of personality. Mm. To me, it's not my personality. I'm definitely not sing-songy. I'm not jolly. What the really? What's there to be happy about? I like the relationship of him and the woods that he lives in. Like, he in his mastery of the woods, it's in letting the woods be what they are. Like, he doesn't impose himself. His relationship with the earth is one that we could all take notice of, especially in today's climate crisis. I don't really like his almost laissez-faire attitude toward Middle Earth as a whole. The reason they can't give him the ring is because he would just set it down and forget it. Like, he doesn't give a shit about anyone else, just wouldn't care. Like, he's like amoral when it comes to that. Not immoral, but amoral. Like, he just doesn't. He has no care for that. So there's negatives to Tom. I like that as what Tom means to the universe, though, is that there's always room for the unknown in fairy stories, in anything that resembles fairy. Like, he's completely enigmatic. He refers to himself. There's, like, he doesn't, like, you can't really point to anything else to categorize him as. Like, you can point to other Maya for Gandalf is like Saruman, is like Radagast in a way. Like, you know what I mean? They all have this. Tom is Tom. Like, he doesn't, there's no one on Tom's level. It's just, he's completely unique. And I think what that does for the story, it doesn't really drive the narrative forward, but it gives us a sense of Middle Earth that, like, what Tolkien saw of the world or of Middle Earth is that there's always going to be unanswered questions. We'll never have a category for certain things. Like, we can't say Tom is Iluvatar. We can't say Tom is Tolkien himself. Tom is Tom. And I think that's the point in Goldberry saying, well, he is. Like, he is. Who is Tom, or what is Tom? He is. It's like that phrase in the Bible, I am, right? I am the great I am, or I am that I am.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Tom is a really interesting character, but just to be, like, he's not in the movies. And when I read a book, if I've seen the movie, now I'm just watching the movie play in my head as I'm reading it, and there's no scene for Tom, and it's like, all right, let's just get past this part so I can get back to the ring rates and the...
Right. And I understand why people have a problem with Tom being cut from the movie. I've never really had a problem with Tom being cut from the movie. You already have to condense the timeline anyway, and it doesn't drive the narrative forward.
Yeah.
So and I might lose my Tolkien cred for saying that. My biggest beef with any of the cuts is the Scouring of the Shire, because that to me completes Campbell's hero's journey motif. And so for the hobbits to return to the Shire, and the Shire to have no understanding of what happened, there still is kind of insulated as before, that doesn't ring true. Like, the point in having the Scouring of the Shire is that, no, like, you can't always be insulated. War will come to your doorsteps eventually. Like, and the heroes have to bring what they've learned back to their community. Like, so we need the Scouring of the Shire, and that's my biggest one big gripe I would have with Jackson's movies is there's only the vision of what might happen, but there needs to actually be the scouring, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I remember getting to the middle of the final book, and I'm like, this is the end of the movie. What's left? Right. And then there's like a whole other half a book left. I agree with you. There's some really good stuff in the Scouring of the Shire that is missed, but
brilliant stuff. Right.
Yeah. So is there a quote from the books that really sticks out to you, like, oh, I just love when so and so says this in this moment? Or
you're gonna put me on the spot to quote. I'm terrible.
You don't have to do word for word. You can just even do a scene if you want. But, like, is there like a moment or a quote that just really sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on the Scouring of the Shire, because to me personally, like, this happened to Mike and I in 2018. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the campfire that burned down Paradise, California. We had our garden and everything there and all of our trees, and the whole town basically burned down. And then we had our own scouring. Like, 5 years later, we have this, like, beautiful micro farm now. So when Sam plants all the trees, including the Malorn nut from Lothlorien, that's, like, I cry every time, like, I read that. It's like, I just imagine the Shire, like, with all the trees cut down, the industrialization, the old mill replaced by the new mill, all that stuff, and then just going and cleaning it and making it whole again, and that next spring when everything, that would be awe-inspiring to witness. So that really, that's like my favorite part of the whole book. Like, one of my favorite parts, just because it's like we experienced it. Like we have pictures of, just everything ashes. Like we have one peach tree on the property that will never produce good fruit anymore, but we keep it because it's the only thing that made it through the fire. Like there's all this like symbolism there that touches you on a real human level from that story. And being someone who loves trees probably the way Tolkien did, just imagining all that planting and having everything come back whole and new again is, it's one of my favorite parts for sure.
That makes Sam even more of a hero of the story.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, that's why to me it's a Sam story. Like the book doesn't end when Frodo goes away. The book ends when Sam is home and at Bag End.
Mm-hmm. And mayor, like leading
and mayor for like 7 consecutive terms, right?
Yeah. Well, we could totally nerd out just about Tolkien all day because I love it. But I don't know much about you. What kind of soil did your life grow out of, and how did faith play a part in that role to kind of bring you to this place that you're in today?
Like this. Well, I mean, my religious background is a sort of non-denominational evangelical Christian, Western Christian background. I guess like the theology would probably derive from some kind of Baptist theology, I would call it rocky soil to use the analogy from the Bible. My home life was tumultuous for like the first 10 years. My mom and my father divorced. My father, deadbeat dad, left. To this day blames us. Like, I don't know how you blame kids. I'm a father myself. Like, I don't know how you blame your kids. But and then my mother and got married to my stepfather, who we moved out, and we moved back in. We moved in with my grandparents. It was that with also like a foot in Christianity. Like we wouldn't go to church, and then we would, and it didn't really get serious until like high school and after, and then I got involved with worship teams and all that, and that's when I started to attempt to be more involved in church. But the theology that I was working with, really I struggled with. Like it the more I experienced in life, the more it didn't hold up. Do you know what I mean? Like the things I believed about the world were not what I was seeing with my own 2 eyes and experiencing. And so the questions and the doubts and the skepticism really nagged at me, until I was like 25, 26, 27. And then I started asking those questions out loud to my church friends and all the people that I spent all the time with. And that in my early 30s is when I came to a confrontation where it's like all the people that I look up to in the church, like they're only your friends, they're only your mentors as long as you kind of stay within the lines. The minute you go outside of that, they get really squirmy. And so it got really uncomfortable. Like they didn't have answers to my questions, and they didn't even want to talk about it, which I thought was weird. Like I thought we were all supposed to be like open-minded and come to our own conclusions and really do your diligence, read the Bible. The more I read the Bible, the more I read about the Bible, it's like the less they seemed to take it seriously. I don't know. It became an avalanche and a snowball into what this is today, where if anyone knows me, like I'm pretty cutthroat when it comes to Christianity these days.
So what were some of the things where you're like, I know this is what I've been told, my theology is this, but what I'm seeing is like, can you like define a few of those things? Like
the first one initially was my grandfather, my mother's father, and his, my grandmother were like, they weren't saved. They weren't born again, right? They were, because we were Portuguese, Sicilian, Hispanic, like sort of Catholic by default.
By default.
But he didn't really care about any of that. So in my mind, it was like they were bound for hell, right? That's the theology. That's them's the breaks. And on the other hand, my father, who is a deadbeat, verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, evangelical, born again Christian. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so how do I square that? Like, one's gonna be bound for hell forever, and one's bound for heaven. But they're like, my grandfather's like the greatest man I knew, and my father's like one of the like most apathetic, could give a shit about anything. That was the big struggle for me. It's like I don't know how to square that with, so that's what sort of kicked off like these questions and these doubts. I got to get to the bottom of this. So hell, that's a big, hell, rapture, apocalypse, Armageddon, all that sort of scenario that leads us down this road where some people end up in heaven, some people end up in hell. And so that was like one of the first things that when deconstruction happened to me, that was one. The other one is I'm not straight, I'm bi. So obviously in the church, that's not accepted. So it took a long time to not only label it, but also accept myself for it, that's just what it is. Like, so all that, that there's, when you're told that God doesn't make mistakes, when you're told that, there's like one way to be, and then you're not that, no matter what someone says, you can't pray the gay away.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't force yourself to be something you're not. You know what I mean? Like, you don't make this choice to like about your sexuality. You can choose to act on it a certain way, but you don't make the choice of what you are, just like you don't choose one day to be straight.
Mm-hmm.
And so coming from a churched mindset that frowned upon that, even though I'm, straight passing and I'm married to a woman, and wrestling with that internally, that impacts my deconstruction as well too, especially not only the theology of it, but the personal implications of it.
Yeah, and then as you said, like as soon as you start asking the questions, then you're no longer the friend you're no longer in the boundaries of what they consider acceptable. And it's so interesting that like evangelical, sometimes fundamentalism, it is really about staying within the boundaries, and then everyone who's not inside of those boundaries is an evangelistic target. And it's like we have an agenda with you now. And when you ask the questions, we're like, oh, we thought you were inside, but now you're showing us that you're actually not inside. So now you become the object of our evangelism, and you're no longer a human. You're no longer a friend. You're no longer a relationship. There's no. You become like the prayer request of the community. You become the, that target of evangelistic friendships or whatever. Like, there's so many agendas that I think evangelicals.
I found that they didn't like, it's odd because I would have been like the perfect person to evangelize to. Like, who better to bring back into the fold than the reprobate? But it seems like I don't know if other people have different experiences but I feel like the minute I backslid or whatever is the minute they were just like, we don't know this guy. We're not going to try to bring him back.
That's interesting.
I'm sure some people do get evangelized too, but to me, sometimes it seems like those prayer requests are just like gossip sessions. Like, we just do the prayer requests so we can talk shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, I find that a lot of and I know this because I used to be evangelical, but evangelical pastors, leaders within evangelicalism, they're like really lonely because they don't have relationships that don't have agendas. And you can see this when a pastor leaves a church, like an evangelical pastor leaves a church and goes to another one. They lost all their friends. They lost their whole community, their worship community, sometimes their kids' schools, all their friendship. Everything is gone because it's all wrapped up in that one place. And then you hop ship and go somewhere else. And, I've changed churches maybe, 5-6 times. And there's maybe one person from every church that I keep up with. And they used to like encompass my whole life. And it's like, well, no wonder pastors are so like lonely. Like, everything's an agenda. Everything's it falls under your job description or whatever. So it's just like, wow.
Yeah, it's almost like a type of emotional fusion Psychologist David Schnarch would talk about this. Rest in peace. And it's confused for a type of connection, but it's really not. Like it's a type of relationship that when it's based on something else, and you have to think like this, there's groupthink, you have to do this, you have to do these different rites and rituals and to be a part of the in club. It's not true relationship because people aren't standing on their own 2 feet as they are. Like they're not, able to, there's never an emphasis on like self-growth and self-love and self-improvement. It's all about the church or the structure or whatever. It's about, which is kind of like a bastardization of what it should be. Like it should be about a community. Mm-hmm. But I think a community can only be healthy if the individuals are also healthy. Like you have to balance the two. And it seems like in many instances, the church underemphasizes certain things and overemphasizes other things and they get out of balance.
Yeah. I think we, define certain biblical terms like godliness or obedience or whatever, and we just swap out the word conformity. It's like, you got to be godly and obedient, and here's what the Bible says, and they produce their lists, which are all cherry picked,
all of it,
and cherry picked according to whatever is the hot topic of the current times. They just swap out the word conformity, and it's like that's not what that means. So now you wrote this book, Wisdom of Hobbits. Why do you think you wrote it at this time of your life? Since you've had this passion for Lord of the Rings for such a long time, why was it, why was this the right time to write this book?
I was just burnt out on theology and philosophy. I mean, I wrote books about theology and Christian theology, and I've kind of moved from a place of like focusing on that to like, what did I want to write about? I'd been intimidated by Tolkien studies just because there's so many brilliant people out there. So I always was like, well, what do I have to offer? Right. It's that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
What good can I offer this community? And then you just get over it and you're like, okay, now's the time. So I think it just came at a perfect time when I was like, what do I want to write about now? I'm done writing about the Bible. I'm done writing about theology. And I write about it like kind of derivatively in these books, but I didn't want it to be biblically focused. And incidentally, now Keith and I are writing a book about Romans. But sometimes, I mean, things just fall into place where they do. Yeah. Like it is what it is. Like you just kind of have to kind of keep your antennas tuned to like, what do you feel like doing? Like I feel like our intuition will lead us to where we want to go. And it just has, I was like, okay, now's the time to write about Tolkien. Like it doesn't have to be just like theology. It doesn't have to be for the halls of academia. Like it doesn't have to be some groundbreaking novel, brand new idea in the world. Just do it well. Whatever you do it well. And I've learned that as a writer, you have your own voice. Even if you're not saying something completely new, you're saying it in a new way. And that might resonate with someone. I've had so many people come up to me and be like, oh, I didn't ever want to read Lord of the Rings. I read your book and now I love it. We watched the movies. One of my editors for the book never had read the book, never watched the movies. And the editor, her husband is a friend of mine, and he's like, I could never get her to watch the movies, read the book. Now we're watching the whole trilogy. I'm like, that's awesome. I'm glad that my book. So whatever I said in a certain way just led people to become a fan of Lord of the Rings and to get involved in Tolkien and I'm happy about that.
Yeah. I was really hesitant to start this podcast. Like I started it in 2015 after I got my doctorate, and then it lasted like 6 months, and then just sat on it. And everyone's like, you need the podcast. And last year, I got a financial gift and I got a whole bunch of technology that helped me figure it out. And but it wasn't just the technology that I couldn't figure out. It was more of like, well, what am I going to say? Because so-and-so's already saying that, and so-and-so's already saying that. And then someone was like, yeah, they're saying it, but not to that group of people that you're talking to.
Sure.
Bring what they're saying to that place. And I was like, oh, yeah, there's a whole, It's like there's plenty of space for your voice, even
Plenty
if
of
you're not
space.
like the, you know, scholarly whatever on everything. It's
Yeah,
like, yeah,
yeah.
I think that's cool. What's something that you learned in writing that surprised you or kind of like changed some things in your mind?
In writing The Wisdom of Hobbits
Yeah.
specifically,
Yep.
I just, well, I did a lot of research on like, I tried to make the book not just written text. Like I tried to expand myself. I drew some maps. I included a list of everything that grows in the Shire that can be confirmed. So I learned all about that. I did sketches. So I'm not like an artist in that way. So I just think like I really tried to immerse myself in what it would be like to almost like write it as if I had visited the Shire, as if I knew these hobbits. And so it pushed me as a writer to think outside of the box, and challenged me. In my Medic Theory in Middle Earth, which is the book that comes after, there's some poetry in there. So I try to. It really pushed me to become a more well-rounded writer, because I've always written prose, and I've never, included. I'm not an artist. I've never been a cartographer. So drawing maps based on things, it pushed me in that way. So I challenge.
That's cool.
It's always good to challenge yourself, as whatever you're creating, like it'll pay off. It's not always going to pay off. Like sometimes you'll flop, but it's always good to push yourself in whatever direction you need to go.
Yeah. Funny you mentioned drawing maps, and my son was in like a writing class, creative writing class, and they were tasked with drawing maps for like anything, for some kind of writing this one day, and they said really just dump rice on the plate and then outline where the rice landed, and they did this whole thing, and then they dumped the rice off the plate, and they're like, now add mountains and trees and rivers and stuff. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow, that really looks like a fantasy map now. Just from
That's
dumping
cool.
rice on the plate. That was really cool.
That's cool.
Well,
I didn't do
think
that because I
you
wasn't
didn't do
creating my
that.
own map. I was trying to, make it
Recreate.
accurate. Yeah.
Well, what do you think is like the task our generation is tasked with carrying? Frodo has the ring. He's got to take it to Mount Doom and save the world. Like, how do you like translate? What is our task in our generation for this time? There might be multiple, but like, what do you see right now?
Yeah, like you said, there's multiple. I think the number one, two things come to mind. Climate change always comes to mind. So we could talk about, again, the scouring and, the desolation and industrialization of the Shire, and then it's scouring. And we can also talk about Fangorn Forest and the Ents and Saruman. I think there's warnings there, like ecologically, like we can't live like this forever. And there will be, horrible consequences if we continue down that path. The second is the renunciation of power. Like the people who desire the power the most tend to be the people with the, illest of intentions. I think of, not to make your show political and divide people, but I think of someone like Donald Trump. I think of Project 2025. Those folks need to read these books we need to read ourselves in some of these situations. Like Galadriel is able to give away power, which is a huge sacrifice. Gandalf is offered the ring and turns it down. We need to check ourselves. Like when we reach for power, it will corrupt us. Like so political power is a big one, especially when we talk about Christian nationalism, when we talk about, I'm also watching The Handmaid's Tale right now. Like, there's dangerous precedents, and we're on kind of like, we're on a knife's edge, to quote Gandalf, when it comes to where this desire for power comes from and where it could lead.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually dedicating the podcast in October and November of the fall to like a politics and faith, and I've scheduled a whole bunch of people to come on, and we're going to talk about Christian nationalism and the elections and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
I will be making the show political.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's fascinating that like Tolkien, a Catholic, is talking about his faith a certain way through his characters. You know, it's not a Christian story, but of course his Christianity, you know, impacts his writing.
Yeah.
And then you have on the other side a whole group of Christians who are desiring power, which is like the whole faith is predicated on serving from below. And they want a lord from above, and it just makes no sense. Like I've said for so long, like, just be a nationalist if you're going to be a nationalist. Like, it's not a great argument, but how can Jesus be your mascot for that? That makes no sense. That's like you know, Samwise Gamgee being your model for national. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, well, to go back to the ecological one, what wisdom do hobbits give us for the task of the ecological crisis we're in?
Well, I love the way they build their homes into the ground, and I think that can be an analogy for how we're to live with nature. It's like, don't lord over it when we kind of like be a part of it. Be seamless with it. Like, they don't have these grandiose buildings. They have buildings, of course, but I just love the unassuming nature of the hobbit hole. And I think that can be like an analogy for how, like, we should have a light footprint on the earth. I personally, the aesthetic of the West is ugly to me. Like, I love permaculture spaces. I don't like things that are parsed out perfectly here and perfectly there. Like, let things grow. I'm big into intercropping. Like, I imagine the Shire as a place with flowers and bees and hummingbirds everywhere, and things might look unkempt and overgrown to certain aesthetics. But the way I see it, it's more like, no, that's a habitat that brings life and so our footprint needs to be a part of that. It's like, again, it's like my interpretation of Christianity would be from below. So, like, literally think about how you impact the ground that you walk on. And it shouldn't really look like too many people have been there. Like, leave it better than when you came. And we do the opposite. We're doing more of the Sauron stuff. Like, we're cutting forests down. We're using resources for the war machine. We're not caring for our forests. And in a way, the forests are fighting back. Like, we don't know what's going to come out of the forest if we go digging in there, what viruses are there, what bacteria are there. We don't know what's under the permafrost and tundras. Like, we keep pushing and pushing and pushing further and further and not respecting the land. The earth will be here long after us if we go bye-bye. Like, it'll heal. Like, look at where places, where societies used to be. Like, nature finds a way to rebound without us.
Yeah.
We're the virus that you know, get rid of us and the earth would be just fine.
That is like the Matrix when what was that? He's the guy that actually was in Lord of the Rings. Anderson. He's like, humans are a disease.
Yeah.
Like, collectively, yeah, we are affecting the earth in such a negative manner. But if you look at the indigenous wisdoms and how indigenous peoples lived on the land, I think like they really got a lot of wisdom to share with us about, because capitalism turns the land into a commodity to be turned into profit. And there's only so much stuff we can pull out of the land. Like, capitalism was thought of in the 1600s when they thought there's no way you could plumb the depths of the ocean and the trees and but we're actually finding we can actually.
Yeah, the whole system is predicated on more and more resources and more growth. Like, it's not in corporate America, let's say, it's not enough to have profits every year. Like, your shareholders will what? Why didn't you have more profits? You had this much last year, you need to have more next year. Like, it's always about more and more. And so there's infinite growth with finite resources has an end game.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're playing that game right now. And
to the detriment of our own fucking species.
Yes. So, yeah, I guess we can talk about ecological crisis all day, but I wanted to
I don't want to be
over.
depressed though. It's like
it
depresses me. Like, I'm in California, and I mean, like we just talked, like our town burned down. Like, there's bigger and bigger fires every year. I just hate the argument, oh, we've always had fires, we've always had hurricanes. Yeah, of course. Like, but every year we break records, like every year. There's not something going on, y'all.
Yeah, I hear you. And it is it's really easy to be consumed in like, oh, there's absolutely no hope. How are we going to stop the war machines? How are we going to stop the corporate profit machines? What does, when you look at large scale, it's really, you get like sucked into depression and hopelessness, but what gives you hope?
Well, like, I think the more granular you go, the more peace and hope. And, if I'm on my property gardening, and like yesterday we just harvested a bunch of corn, peppers, I'm getting bumper crop of berries, finally getting tomatoes, Brandywine tomatoes. Shout out to the Brandywines.
Yeah.
The more local you think, the more hope you can get. Like, get involved with local politics, get involved with local community centers, get involved with, if you're LGBT, your local Stonewall or whatever. I think the more you actually are involved in your community, the more you see, oh, like, most of us are innovative and caring and empathetic, and like, yes, some of us are terrible, but it's really the group. It's when you get in groups. It's when you get in, like, I mean, I'd be willing to bet. I don't know how the conversation went. I haven't edited the podcast, but on the God Squad, Keith, as a bonus show, talked to a MAGA supporter for like an hour. He says it was a lovely conversation. So, like, one-on-one, like, even people who are like polar opposites tend to just be people, like, and that would give me hope. Like, how they stay on Trump still, I don't get it. I don't understand that, but most people are decent. So the more local, that gives me hope. Just on your own property, in your own community, on your own street, in your neighborhood. It's not a lot of hope. Don't get me wrong.
But it's where you can find it. It's where
you have to find it where you can find it. Like,
yeah,
there's got to be some hope somewhere. Otherwise, I mean, there's a big difference between no hope and some hope. It might not be a lot of hope, but that difference is, like, it's qualitatively, huge.
Yeah, and I think, like, our culture with, the rise of, like, national television and then national sports, and then now the internet is making things global. Like, everything is getting bigger and bigger, where it used to be, like, what baseball team are you rooting for? It's my local home team baseball team. And now it's like, well, it's the MLB. Or, sports are, we made everything about the fame and national spotlights and everything, but that is really, like, dismantled that local feeling. I do a lot of funerals, and the funerals, when people are describing these older folks' lives of, who were born in the 40s and the 50s, and they're like, yeah, we just hung out on their porch, and Sundays was everyone came over for dinner. And, like, there's this thing that we lost, and, the politics picks that and says, oh, we'll bring us back to where we were. We promise you we'll get you there. I think that's what a lot of the MAGA promises. Like, there's some things that we lost that they're promising to take us back to that I think is false promises. Sure. I think the real problem is that nationalization of everything. Everything got so big, and now it's national news and national sports and national this and that. Everything's bigger, and we lost the small hometown, local, neighborhood expressions of things. And I don't know. It's like a domicide. We lost our home.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the insidious part of something like MAGA is that there's in every lie there's like a grain of truth somewhere. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a successful lie.
Yeah.
Like drain the swamp. Let's just I mean take out corruption and money in politics. Sure, we can get on board with that. Like but so it's the grain of truth. It's like, and like you said, you want to go back to what? Well, there's certain things from the past that are good. Wasn't good for everyone in America, obviously.
Right.
Black and brown folks, women, queer folks, like, but there are nuggets of truth in that sort of like you just said, the communal aspect of your neighborhood, like, a block party, a little potluck, people coming together, all that kind of stuff, that wholesome shit, all about it. But it's then that gets twisted and manipulated, and that's kind of the carrot that they dangle in front of folks to get them on board with this thing. But in the end, you're giving your trust and your hope in a billionaire from New York who doesn't give a fuck about you. Like, if you're poor and white in Kentucky, honestly, I'm telling you, swear to God, like, he does not care about you. Like, he never has and never will. Like, that's not a politic thing. That's like every New Yorker's like, yep. Like, for real, like, he's giving you promises just like every snake oil salesman gives you promises. But poor folks, I mean, Dave Chappelle made a joke about, he's like, Dave Chappelle is a black man. He's like, he cares more about me than you. Like, he cares about rich folks. He cares about his own power. Like, he's exploiting the poor. That's what it is. And he's exploiting Christians. We had Eve Was Framed. She's an agnostic atheist, and we had a joke. We had to admit, like, this is the first atheist president we ever had, grifting from Christians.
Wow, that's really interesting.
I was like, Eve, he's your guy. Sorry, you got to claim that one.
Oh, I bet that hurt.
We had a good time.
Oh, good. That's good. So who are some of the Sams that we need to look to for help in this time that we're in?
Oh, man. First person that comes to mind, William Barber, Poor People's Campaign, I believe. December Rose. I love everything December does. People like Lisa Sharon Harper. I'll give a shout out to Keith just because. Anyone who's doing the work for like true equity and equality and true justice, like that kind of work. Like, I think of people like Brandon Robertson in the queer community. I think of people like Shonda Jha in the Indian community, and also in the queer community. I think people who are taking seriously the charge to look at your own view through the eyes of someone else who's marginalized or historically marginalized. People doing that. I mean, anyone who's like putting that at the fore, like, that's important. It's important to hear from those kinds of voices. So those are just a few names that popped to mind.
That's good. I read The Wisdom of Hobbits, and I really liked it because, one, I'm a Tolkien nerd. I love just that whole world captures my attention, but I see so many correlations between that world and ours. It never like, ends. But I chose one of the quotes here that I wanted to read and get you to say a few things about it. But you said, of course, most authors would have given us quite a different and contradictory final Mount Doom scene. For most, no matter what, Frodo, our hero, would have prevailed, even if he puts the ring on and at some point decides not to destroy it. That still small voice would have eventually triumphed, but not here, not for Tolkien. Instead, in Middle-earth, evil seems to destroy itself. It is not overcome by the power of good. It literally works against itself, leading to its own collapse. What sparked that thought, and how do you see that playing out in our world today?
Well, it's not to say like what I'm not saying is that goodness doesn't matter. Like I'm not saying that Frodo, this is in the context of Frodo making choices for good, from taking the ring, from the Shire, from leaving the Shire, from all the things that led up to there. What, 1,800 miles? I think. Don't quote me. Or
Yeah.
no, maybe it's 800 miles. I couldn't remember if it's kilometers or miles. A long ways.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that goodness doesn't play its part. It's just to say that evil will never accomplish the ends that it sets out to do. Like it will. I mean, the moral arc of the universe points towards justice, and it might be long as hell. But the evil that gets in the way will always fall in on itself. Like so. Yeah, don't give into it. Don't give into it now. Like it's not going to lead to the ends that you think it will. Like the phrase like, I don't want to get biblical, but I'll butcher the quote now. And I'm trying to think of like an analogy in today's world. Like, I mean, to stay on MAGA, like, I think it'll expose itself for what it is, and people will wake up. The people who, like, I think of all the women who vote against their own interests by voting for this kind of stuff. Like, enough will wake up and realize that this evil, this kind of cancer, is self-defeating. It'll expose itself for, like, it doesn't have your best interest in mind, especially as women. It doesn't have your best interest in mind. Those of us who care about the climate, those of us who have a strong critique of capitalism, like this unmitigated laissez-faire capitalism, and we see that, like, so best to get off that train. It's tracks that leads to nowhere,
Yeah. I just heard an interview. It was Tolkien's actual voice, and he was saying that this was not a character flaw of Frodo. This is not like him failing in the last moment. This is him finally succumbing to the power of power itself.
Yeah.
And he said nobody in the whole story could have done as much as Frodo did. And even when Frodo gets to that place, it is not a failure of his. It's just the power is that overcoming, and that's when the evil collapses on itself to destroy itself. Goodness takes us that far, but evil then collapses on itself in that moment and just kind of destroys itself. If we were playing that narrative out today, like what are the goodness things that are going to bring us to the place where we have to look this evil power in the face? And then how would you foresee, of, like, if you're writing the story of the world right now, how would you see evil collapsing on itself and then bringing this resolution on the other side?
That's a tough question.
It is, but it's a good one.
It is a good one. I tend to be so pessimistic that it's hard. Like, it's hard to, I mean, I do think part of this, I hope, and again, it's a small hope, that like something like Project 2025 is overreaching. Like it's like they're saying so many quiet parts out loud now that the people, because movements like this need cover. They need to be provided cover by decent people who don't take it seriously, and they've gotten so bold in their messaging and so bold in their rhetoric that I do think enough people are waking up, especially women who say, no, this we can't live in Gilead. You know what I mean? Like people like Margaret Atwood, like have like you're in creating something like Project 2025, you're fanning the flame of the resistance that will, that will cause it to collapse. It can't. Project 2025 can't sustain itself. Like it's just not. Like it's but I don't know how it itself collapses in on itself, because it's hard to separate the goodness that we need to do in resisting it. Like we need to take the ring from the Shire to Mount Doom. So how that works, I don't know how it's going to work out and collapse on itself. I just know that we have to fight it. That doesn't answer your question. It also almost refutes what Tolkien says. Like, no, we have to be the good to resist it. So I like how it plays out in the story. I'm not sure how it plays out in the real world all the time. And I don't know if that would be our concern. Like, we have to be the good. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
I don't. We have to trust that evil will collapse on itself, and we may not be able to have enough good to do that, but we have to do it.
Yeah.
It's almost contradictory. I know I'm rambling about it because I don't have a great answer. Like, I don't know how it happens.
Well, I know that in Lord of the Rings, like, so much is like riding on those miracles that step in at the last moment to save things that we never really see in our lives. You know, like the eagles are coming. It's like everything was hopeless until the eagles showed up. They weren't, and it's like we don't always get that moment in our lives. We like to think that it's, you know, God is in control. We have all these like cliches about, you know, all this stuff, but to rely on the eagles coming to kind of save us is almost like that whole, like, well, God's going to come back. We don't have to worry about the climate because Jesus will come back and fix it. And it's like, well, let's not rely on that because it's been a long time, you know, like.
Yeah. And that's what I'm trying to say is like, we can't rely on evil collapsing on itself, and we can't rely on God as a Deus ex machina or something. Or, you know, the escapism of rapture theology and all that. We have to do the good and let it shake out and take things as far as we can go. And I guess just not concern ourselves with how it ends. We just have to continue to do the good for the sake of the good.
Yeah, I think so, and not really look for the eagles to step in at the last moment and save the day, because that's a part of fairy stories, but we don't live in a fairy stories. But that can inspire and inform the real life. I don't think it's like totally like useless or worthless because it's inspiring as a story. Yeah. But we can
leave room for it as well in our story, and leave room for that happening. Should it happen? I'm a skeptic.
I'm not going to put my bets on the table on that one, though. I don't think the Eagles are coming. We got to do the work.
Exactly.
Well, you highlight the traditional hero's journey illustrated in The Lord of the Rings, that departure from home, the initiation process, and then the return to home. Very liminal themes there. But when the hobbits return home after the scouring the Shire moment, you know, when they come home, and then they cleanse the Shire and they bring it. It's like this. They no longer can integrate into their home that used to be their home because they're so different. And you wrote something, you said, as we find out towards the end of the Return of the King, Frodo's feet indeed stand in the Shire again, though not on firm ground. And though he stays in the Shire a year or so after the end of the War of the Ring, cleaning up loose ends and lending a helping hand in and around Bag End, he eventually acknowledges that the Shire will not and cannot be saved for him. Though the hobbits have restored and rebuilt it after its razing, Frodo's personal wounds run too deep. He finally realizes that peace can only be had outside of it, in Valinor to be exact. And this is the bittersweet part of Frodo's ending. He is the main catalyst, though perhaps not the main hero, for the salvation of the Shire, and yet because of the wounds he suffered in his sacrifice for others, he is never able to enjoy it again. And that's one of the parts that I don't think the movies capture very well. But many who deconstruct like find themselves on this journey in which they really, you know, they find themselves, but then it changes them so much that they no longer fit into their, you know, quote unquote home.
Yep.
What would the hobbits have for us in these scenarios?
I think the hobbits culturally wouldn't have much. Like, it takes extraordinary hobbits to teach us this. Like, Bilbo was extraordinary, and Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin were, but they were extraordinary for a reason, because they stepped outside their boundaries. Like, they stepped outside into the world. And hobbits tend to be quite insular. And so I think in what they bring back is a cultural shift where they tell more stories in this way. Like, their stories before, they had stories, but it wasn't like the way that elves told stories. A lot of their books and writings before Frodo's journeys were like family trees and things like that. Not very interesting to like the world at large, but interesting to hobbits. But what they bring after is like they have libraries and they have books and they have writings. And I think just when we leave our legacy like that, though our wounds need to be healed elsewhere, though we can't return home, like I can't ever go to church again. I don't feel. Church may be for you, maybe not. For me, it's never going to be my home again. But you leave a legacy of like telling the stories for those who come after you, of just giving a different perspective. So I think what hobbits can teach us is that we need to look at those around us who push the envelope for something bigger and better and more inclusive, more diverse, more equitable. I'm a homebody, so I do gravitate toward the Shire, but there could be certain things in my life that I would need to leave the Shire. And Frodo's story tells us that it's going to be okay. Like, Sam goes on and leads a happy life. Frodo goes on and his wounds are healed. Merry and Pippin, they live a happy life after the Shire, even though what they return to isn't exactly the same for them. Frodo the most obvious, right? Mm-hmm. But even for him, his story it's sad for us, but it's happy for him. It's sad for Sam, but Sam lives a great life after, like, Mayer, 13 kids, I think, Rosie Cotton, his wife, Bag End becomes his home. It's a joyous, though it's a bittersweet story, like Frodo leaves a legacy that gives others hope in the future, people that we don't even know. Mm.
I like your emphasis on story, telling new stories and
stories
expanding.
Are so important, and that's why fiction is so important. Like, from what I understand, like it leads us toward empathy, whereas nonfiction doesn't as well.
It leads us towards ideology more often.
It can,
yeah. I really like that emphasis on story, and they bring new stories back that then shape the culture that they're in, and those stories, are based on their actual wounds and healing and return home and salvation. So there's just so much good stuff in the Lord of the Rings. And if anyone's never read it, I think your book is just a good entryway to, like, these are the themes, this is the story, behind the story. And they can really, like, engage the movies or the books, because they are just some of the best fiction ever written, I think. So
I can't disagree with you there.
Well, I want to thank you for writing that book and for introducing Lord of the Rings to people who might not have experienced it before, and for this conversation that kind of brings the stories of Lord of the Rings to, like, a modern day context. Where would you like to direct people to connect with your work and to buy this book?
Oh, well, it's anywhere books are sold. So, Quire.com is my our publishing, Keith and my publishing company. So all of our books are there. If you follow us, you can follow me on social media, or on Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook. If you're old like me, that's what my daughter always says. Facebook's for old people.
Yeah, and I'm old.
Whatever. And I'm old, so what do you want to do? But yeah, Quire.com is where you can get all of our books.
All right. And any podcasts you want to highlight that you want me to drop in the links for people to go check out?
Oh, well, yeah. I co-host the Heretic Happy Hour almost 7 years now. Can you believe it? And they said it wouldn't last. And I also produce the God Squad, which is a spinoff on the Sirius XM every Wednesday on John Fugelsang's Tell Me Everything show. So they turned one of the segments into a podcast that I now produce. It live streams on every Thursday at 5 p.m. across 5 p.m. Pacific across social media.
All right. Well, I will make sure to put links to those things down in the notes so people can just click on it and get there. But Matthew, thank you so much for coming and nerding out with Lord of the Rings and ecology and politics and life and all that stuff.
Yeah, thanks for letting me ramble on about stuff.
Oh, it was fun. Rambling is what podcasts are all about, because you don't get this on national televisions. You get very concise, precise. And this is just conversations, and I love it. This one was fun.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey today. I hope Matthew's insights into the wisdom of hobbits and his candid reflections on the faith and personal growth resonated with you as much as they did with me. It was so fun to nerd out over Lord of the Rings and bring it down to the real aspects of our lives today. That's just a powerful reminder that true connection and authenticity often come from the most unexpected places. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to the audio or YouTube video, or both if you're going to be a rock star. Or you could leave us a review if you've already done those things. Give us a 5-star, or write a little thing about why you like it. Leave it on those Apple podcasts or wherever you listen to this. Your feedback actually helps continue to bring this thought-provoking conversation, inspiring stories to people that would love to hear it. And don't forget to check out Matthew's book, The Wisdom of Hobbits. He's written plenty of books. That one is available on Amazon or from Quire. And links are going to be down in the show notes. So until next time, I'm Tom Rundell, and this has been the Living the Living podcast, reminding you, may you find the courage to embark on your own hero's journey, the wisdom to seek genuine connections, and the inspiration to keep moving forward. Peace out.